At 11:22 this morning, Princess and left Windsor Castle. People who knew her right away knew that the look on her face meant she was controlledly devastated. The emergency family meeting she had just left, music, went 4 hours and ended with a choice that was so hard to make that even Anne, who is known for keeping her cool, had trouble staying calm. The royal family will never be the same after what she says. There was no reason for this meeting to happen. The word did not get out loud or to many people. Instead, it went through a narrow corridor of power that was only there when things didn't go as planned. People who got it quickly recognized the format. There was no subject line, no explanation, and no softer language. There was only a clear, short command. That person had to be at Windsor as soon as dawn broke. No one had to ask why. By the time the sky in the east started to get lighter, people were already moving along private roads and locked gates that didn't show up on maps very often. Different vehicles arrived at different times, on purpose, without any obvious security or escorts. This wasn't a matter of keeping things quiet for show. It was a matter of choice for power. Princess Anne was the first person in the meeting room. She didn't have any papers with her or a phone with her. She didn't look over the notes because she had asked not to have any. Her need at this point wasn't a lecture, but alignment. Without a fuss, she sat down at the long table and waited. Next was King Charles III. His face showed that he was tired, not scared. The look of music, someone who had spent the night taking things in without responding to them. He stopped for a moment at the entry and looked around the room as if to see if it was big enough for what was going to be talked about. Then he sat down, removing the normal signs of rank in favor of directness. Last was Prince William. He showed up without any staff, folders, or other signs of planning that usually go with his appointments. It felt different to have him here this morning. In other words, he wasn't there to watch or learn. He was there because what was being talked about had to do with the future. That what didn't come was just as telling as the fact that no communications officials were there to shape the words. There are no law experts who can spot music, risk. There were no aides standing near the door in case someone needed help. Everything in the room that could have changed the tone or direction of the talk had been taken away. Replies were not the point of this meeting. It was a meeting about making things right. The setting itself made that truth stronger. That's not why the curtains were drawn, to keep things quiet. There was nothing on the table. There were no water cups, folders, or exactly organized briefing packs. Comfort had been purposely taken away from the space. The message wasn't clear. This conversation wasn't meant to last a long time. No one spoke for a short time. That stop wasn't a sign of doubt. One thing that changed was that everyone there knew they weren't working within the normal rules for making decisions in the house. The usual steps of choices, waiting, adjusting, and controlled exposure had already been used up elsewhere. Now there was only one choice. The meeting was called for by information that came late the night before and was sent through official routes that left no room for interpretation. It hadn't been checked by advisors or made less harsh with conditional language. That came right along with it paperwork that shut doors instead of opening them. It wasn't a message. It came to an end. King Charles broke the silence with a question that wasn't meant to defend or plan. He was wondering if silence was still a possibility. It wasn't about whether it was better, easier, or more sensible. It was about whether it was still possible without any trouble. There was no need to argue about the answer. People around the table could already tell by the looks on their faces. Princess Anne spoke first, but she didn't say anything that could be taken as instructions. She made it clear that the silence was already hurting things. What used to be judgment turned into lying because of inertia. The institution is now at risk, she said. Not because of the circumstances themselves, but because of how long they had been kept from the public. Prince William paid close attention, focusing on the steps being described rather than the people in the room. He knew that the meeting was important not just because of the facts, but also because of the time. Music, whatever choice was made, would not exist by itself. It would set a standard for how to deal with truth, music, when it could no longer be made. As the specifics were looked over, the nature of the issue became clearer. There was no way to handle this situation calmly. It wasn't something that would get better on its own if given time. The effects went beyond the direct care of the family and affected the structure of responsibility and continuity. Each person involved knew that the question wasn't whether or not the truth would come out, music, but how skewed it would be if the family didn't own it. The story would shift more to someone else the longer the information was delayed. Princess, and looked at that risk in a way that is typical of her. She told them that institutions have rarely been judged in the past for dealing with disaster. It judged them for skirting the law. She said that in these kinds of situations, being careful didn't protect trust. Being clear did. There was no dispute, but a clear change was made. The family finally came to the understanding that the tools they had been using for decades were not going to work for what was coming next. We couldn't handle this situation with carefully planned reassurance or small amounts of information being shared. As the talk went on, Prince William's posture changed in small ways. He was no longer learning new things. He was waiting for something to happen. He knew that the choices made in this room would speed up his own shift in ways that planning alone could not lessen. The meeting had changed in tone by the time the talk came to its natural end with music. What started as an urgent meeting turned into a chance for the institution to define itself. The people involved were no longer asking what to do next. They chose what kind of person they wanted to be seen as when the truth came out. One question was still unanswered. Not if recognition would come, but who could give it without delusion, defense, or confusion. There was no need to say the answer out loud. Almost everyone in the room looked at Princess and, who stands between us and them. Princess and didn't speak for longer than anyone thought she would. She let the silence grow, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to. During that pause, the room got back to normal. The sense of urgency that had brought them together changed into something stricter. Pay attention. When she finally spoke, she didn't say anything first. It wasn't like she summed up what had already been said or understood how serious the situation was. Instead, she talked about the structure that had been used up until then. She made it clear that the family had reached the end of what management could do for them. This moment was no longer about logistics or giving a talk, whatever it had been before. It had gone too far into moral ground, which could not be changed with strategy. Her power wasn't shown. It was thought of. After decades of service, she had earned a unique place in the family, one that wasn't based on love or fear, but on dependability. Instead of singing, she was known for being consistent. When she stepped in, it was clear that she had only done so after the delay had turned into a choice and the music had clinically described how things were getting worse. The family only had two choices left. They could be honest and careful when they spoke, or they could let the truth come out through pieces put together by people with less knowledge and fewer rules. There wasn't a third way. She made it clear that time was no longer neutral. There was a clear loss of trust. King Charles did not speak during the listening. People there noticed that there was no pushback. In the beginning of his reign, he liked to compare choices to past ones and move slowly when possible. It was now impossible to add more space. He wasn't being indecisive. His silence meant that he knew what to do. Things had gotten worse past the point where being careful would have helped, and turned her attention to Prince William, but not to teach him something. The way she talked to him made him sound like his future would depend on what happened next. She reminded him that the organization could handle losing people. What it couldn't handle was the idea that it hid the truth when it was uncomfortable. Moments like these stayed with me much longer than the moments themselves. This new way of looking at things changed the mood in the room. We talked less about managing consequences and more about taking responsibility. It became clear that the goal wasn't to keep the family from feeling bad. It was done to keep the building from rusting. The important change happened when she set limits on what could be said in public. She stressed that the statement shouldn't downplay how bad things really are. It shouldn't make it sound like the results were still unknown when they weren't. And it can't give the impression that thinking was still going on. If the discussion was over, any of those would be misleading, even if they weren't meant to be. Her honesty broke the remaining urge to hide by omission. She changed sharing from exposure to stewardship. She said that the government had never made it by acting like problems didn't exist. It made it through by showing that it could deal with problems without changing. There was discomfort in the room, but no one said anything about it. The discomfort wasn't caused by dispute, but by what happened. As soon as the truth was told, it could not be taken back or changed, and recognized her fear without giving in to it. She told them that staying together was not a risk for the future. This was the case at the time. The things that were being talked about had already happened. There was only one choice left. Would recognition be based on honesty or on calculation? She quietly said that history didn't have a lot of forgiveness for the second one. As soon as the practical question of who should give the message came up, and didn't offer herself right away, she let the question sit for a while. In that spot, the answer was clear without having to be said. People in and outside the family knew they could trust her when things were tough at the school. People didn't see her as either emotional or self-protective, which was a very important difference right now. When she finally agreed to talk, it was only under certain conditions. The statement would be true and complete. It would keep guesswork to a minimum. There would be no hints of future updates or possible improvements, and it would not be said with any feeling, and argued that tragedy did not need to be made more interesting in order to be understood. Prince William let us know about this with a simple nod. The way that person moved spoke louder than any words. It meant that they agreed with both the plan and the philosophical shift that it reflected. It wasn't about keeping things comfortable anymore. It had to do with stopping more harm. That was the end of the meeting. It didn't end with any words of comfort or closure. Music, there was no longer a clear way forward. Princess Anne was going to talk. Without any reservations, her family would stand by what she said, and no matter what happened, it would not be changed. As they left the room, they didn't feel better. There wasn't any conclusion, so there was no relief. What was there instead was fixed. There wasn't a disaster in that space, but that's where it would start to be recognized, because Princess Anne had drawn a line there and wouldn't let anyone cross it. The news that no one was ready to hear. It wasn't a big deal when the confirmation came through.